Now here again is Rabbi Sherre Hirsch.
Hi, Lydia.
Wonderful message,
Thank you.
Sherre, on how one can be sustained by faith. Your example of your child Emmett in medical crisis at the beginning of your message, and your reference to the 23rd Psalm at the end, which is often read at Jewish funerals. Were you thinking of your father then?
I was. You know, Lydia, I'm not sure if you know, but my father passed away at 58 from pancreatic cancer. It was 6 months from start to finish. And when I had to read that psalm at his funeral, I really felt God speaking to me. Walk on, which in that moment is so difficult. But that's what God wants from us.
And that kind of walking on in the midst of intense grief is different than stoicism, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Because of faith.
Stoicism is sort of just putting on a happy face so other people feel comfortable. But it's really about finding that inner strength within yourself, and I think relying on God to feel powerful. Yeah.
And you did that in your spiritual practice too after the fact. I read an article that you wrote about the daily morning practice that you did.
Yes.
Can you share with us those questions you ask yourself on a regular basis?
Well, it's interesting, Daniel. Every morning as a Jew, it's traditional to pray 3 times a day. But in the morning, you have to go after death 3 times a day with a minyan, with 10 people. And within the prayer service is those series of questions. What are we? What is our life? And I would sit there, and for the years before my father was alive and well, I glossed through the questions, I didn't think about it. Every single morning, I would drag myself out of bed and think, why do I have to do this? And then sure enough, I'd get to those questions, and it would force me to look at, what is my life? What does this matter? What am I supposed to be doing for a year? Can you imagine a year of asking those questions? But it was transformative, because out of it, I am not a subscriber to believing that there's meaning to my father dying, but I had to make meaning after the fact, and it helped me do that.
You say that transformation of the fear in the midst of our crises defines our faith. I want to ask you how your prayers that you've just cited are different than when you were 10 years old praying in the closet of your bedroom.
They're so different, Lydia. It's interesting because I've always felt a personal relationship with God. And it's waned and waxed over the years, especially when my father died. I had to get up in front of a pulpit of 2,000 people, and I was expected to say, you know, my father has died, and now God is great. And that's the last thing I felt. I wanted to get up, and I said to them, I'm really struggling to believe. I think my prayers, to answer your question, is they've gotten more honest. That God is big enough to hear my anger, my frustration, my disbelief, that God can help the people in Africa, but also God can hear and help me, even if I'm frustrated with God. And I think as a child, I thought maybe God would get mad. I don't think that anymore. I think God wants my honesty.
To follow up on that, another article you wrote that I had read, I thought was a
You've
wonderful.
been good reading,
I've been doing
Daniel.
my research, haven't I? You talked about as a child being bored in temple, and I wonder if you can share that with us a little bit, because it obviously informed your process on the way to becoming a rabbi, but also, you know, in the practice of making your spirituality active and alive and vibrant in your communities that
Well,
you've
I
been
don't
in.
think I'm terminally unique being bored in synagogue.
Right, but
you know, you have to open this book in words you don't understand, and you have to sit for hours and hours and hours, and it's very different than sort of the Christian. Everybody comes late, there's talking, there's coming, and there's going. It's not very focused, but it's very, for me, it was very boring. And I think part of it is learning how to make this exciting. And I think that's been one of my tasks as a rabbi. It's one of the reasons we brought into our synagogue a live band, because you're competing with all these, you're competing with MTV, you're competing with all this exciting, you know, media, and then you come to synagogue and you sit. And I think for me, it's been really hard to say to people, get engaged. And so I have to make it engaging, and I think that's my responsibility.
When you confessed to the rabbi of that temple that you were bored, he told you he was bored too.
Yes.
That's the wonderful
He
part of the story.
absolutely told me he's bored. And that was, I think, a turning moment for me.
I've got to ask you, well, prior to that, you took a backpack trip throughout
Yes.
Asia alone as a
Yes.
contemplative for 1 year. As a
Not for 1 year, for 3 months.
Oh, I thought it was for a year. At any rate,
at 1
in
year, I
those-
don't know if I could have
in
done it.
those 3 months, a contemplative experience as you were struggling to decide whether to go into the rabbinate.
Yes. Sometimes it's like the Wizard of Oz. Sometimes you have to take a long way around to find your way back home.
Oh, what was that moment that you decided to continue your studies?
I think when I realized I didn't have to be a rabbi. I didn't have to carry this mantle of a rabbi, because a rabbi to me was what a rabbi was to all my contemporaries, an old man, a wise man, a beard, that I could be myself and be a teacher. And that's what a rabbi was. And whether that was in a pulpit or whether that was writing a book, that I had a lot more choices. And that's when I
And
realized.
you became the first woman rabbi at
Yeah,
Temple
not
Sinai.
easy. Not
I
easy.
bet that was quite a test.
And I have to ask you, you are a rabbi in the conservative tradition
Yes.
of Judaism. What does that mean these
Exactly.
days?
Well, it's so confusing to people because automatically people look at you, they see your gender, they see you're a woman, and they say, oh, you're Reform, which is not the case. Women were ordained in the conservative movement starting in 1985. And so I was the 60th. Now there's over 300 women. But it's hard for women to ascend in any field, and to be the first woman in a pulpit of that size was shocking. I mean, the first sermon I gave, I'll just tell you this quick story. I was speaking, and I looked out, and nobody's eyes were blinking. And I paused, and I said, blink, blink, to 1,200 people, because they'd never seen a woman in that position. And I am grateful for what they were open to.
What does a conservative
Forgive me.
Jewish rabbi think about Jesus?
Well, he was a Jew, and he's been a leader for a significant other faiths, but he was a Jew. He was one of many Jews.
And that rootedness is important for Christians to remember as well.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, thank you for coming today,
Thank you.
to share with us this important story. I think you've challenged us to look at those really difficult times in our lives as certainly teaching opportunities to deepen our faith and to continue on this daily journey that you've lived yourself.
Thank you, Daniel.
Absolutely.
Thank
Right.
you, Lydia. It's a pleasure.